And so what's happened because of this planning philosophy, which is spread around the country and spread around the world, is we've gotten unbelievable distortions in funding relative to how much things are used. In the state of Washington, for example, and it's not that unusual, in the state of Washington, 28% of the spending on transportation, highways versus transit, is on transit. What do you want to guess the amount of travel that is on transit? Try 2%. Then in addition to that, think about the fact that not 1 ton mile is moved by transit of freight. So the fact is you have this distortion of funding that creates the shortage in the kind of transportation we need and leads to higher congestion. And then we have a situation where, there's great concern about greenhouse gas emissions, and the Portland people, and when I say Portland people, I mean the people from Sydney, I mean the people from Vancouver, BC, and all around the world who hold this same philosophy. They anticipate that the way we need to reduce greenhouse gas emissions is to force everybody onto transit and to force everybody into high-rise and high-density development. Maybe not high-rise, but higher-density development. And it's interesting because the Transportation Research Board of the National Research Council has recently finished research. The black line up there is the present projection of the Department of Energy with respect to the greenhouse gas emissions from cars between now and 2030. Notice it actually goes down, and this is because cars are getting so much better. You want to know how much better we get by forcing people out of their cars and onto transit? What you get is only a 5% improvement. And I'll show you later that it really is not a very effective thing. It's incredibly expensive, and this basically demonstrates that the Portland model is not very effective. Now, this is Paris. I used to live, first year I was in Paris, I lived down that street. Something goes on with respect to a lot of people who go to Europe that I call Louvre syndrome. They go and they sit in the coffee shop, the cafe across the street from the Louvre, and they look at it and they say, why can't things be like this in Vancouver? And what they don't realize is that if they go 5 miles further north, south, east, or west, they'll see something that looks a lot more like Vancouver. And if they go 10 miles, they'll definitely be in Vancouver. What is not understood is that these historic cores of European cities are just that. One of the reasons we don't have historic cores like that, much of which was built in the 1700s, is there just wasn't a lot of building going on in Clark County, even in Multnomah County at that point. We don't build 17th century cities anymore. Now, many of you who have been to Paris probably have not been to this neighborhood of Paris. That looks sort of like my neighborhood in St. Louis, doesn't look much different than your neighborhoods here in Vancouver. And what's not understood is if you look up in the corner there, there's a little map, and you see the little yellow circle. That is what's called the Ville de Paris, the city of Paris. It has 2 million people. Around it are 9 million people in the metropolitan area. Paris is very suburbanized. The great majority of people live in the suburbs, and the great majority, believe it or not, of jobs are in the suburbs. Now, there's this other issue that a lot of people don't understand, and that is that virtually all growth in urban areas around the world has been suburban for the last 40 or 50 years. Now, the Portland planners would like you to think that they have really, improved and increased density and all that kind of thing, population density. Here is a chart that shows you Portland's population density in relation to other major cities. Portland is the red down there. A lot of people like to think that Los Angeles, and we've got ourselves a word that is the equivalent of sin. We call it sprawl. One cannot mention sprawl without bringing down the wrath of whoever we want to bring the wrath of down upon us. The fact is that Los Angeles is often perceived as a sprawling city. If Los Angeles was at Portland densities, Los Angeles would sprawl at least twice as much. Los Angeles is a very high-density city. This is a marvelous picture from Australia where they've adopted the same kind of planning policies. You see these 2 suburban houses on the far fringe of Perth. I stood there for about 15 minutes hoping one of the owners would come out and try to mow the lawn between those 2 houses, but it never happened. So that picture should have been out just because I don't have time for it. Transit does play an important role, however. Transit plays a really important role with respect to getting people to work in the central city. For example, if you go to New York, south of 59th Street, 75% of the people who work there get there on transit. Portland, downtown Portland, the Census Bureau says it's about 30%. Those are big numbers, and that's very important. But when you go to the rest of the city, you find it's not that big a deal. In Paris, for example, you go to the suburbs where you have very good transit service, and you have a situation where only 40% of the jobs in the suburbs adjacent to rail stations are available to reach by train within an hour, and something like 80% of the jobs can be reached by car. Here's a little map of Portland. It shows a residential location out about 100th and Holgate. This map shows you where you can get on 30 minutes on transit in Portland. The green area shows you where you can get by car in 30 minutes. So that, again, is the big problem. Now, it's not impossible to serve the Portland metropolitan area with a transit system that can compete with the cars. What you need is a system like I've designed up here for Portland, which is a subway system that would require lines every half mile. And that would, of course, cost as much as the entire personal income of the area every year to run and to pay the debt service on. So obviously, we're not going to do that. Well, what did I do here? Wrong thing. Okay. The other thing that's not understood by a lot of people is transit is slower than driving. This is a map. This is the 50 largest metropolitan areas in the country. The red is how long it takes to work by means of a car. The green is the additional time that it takes by transit. So there's a good reason why people don't take transit. They do take it where it's better, but it's not for the most part. One of the other problems with Portland philosophy is that densification, making things more dense, actually makes the traffic worse, not better. Now, the planners would have you believe if we force densities up, people will get out of the car and there'll be less traffic congestion. No, even Sierra Club research tells us if we double population density, we're going to increase traffic by 60%. And that's just not going to make traffic worse. It has other impacts. It makes air pollution worse because we slow down cars, we have more stop and go, the air pollution gets more intense. And the American Heart Association tells us that people who live on streets with higher traffic intensities have a greater propensity to heart attack and stroke. So not only is Portland's planning philosophy bad with respect to what it does to traffic congestion, it's also less healthy. Now, other research by an economist, Raven Sachs, at the Federal Reserve Board, tells us that areas with Portland-style planning policies actually have slower economic growth than they would have otherwise. You wonder why? Part of the reason you have 14% unemployment here? The former president of Metro, when he left, was interviewed on KGW TV when he went to New York, and he was complaining about the problem that the Portland area is having in terms of job creation and income. Wow. Really, really not surprising given the policies that these people have implemented. Which gets us back to the old slide I showed you before, that if people can get around easily, you're going to have better economic growth. And so what you've got is three major problems with the Portland planning philosophy. One, it increases traffic congestion. Two, it makes air pollution more intense. And three, it hurts economic growth. So now let's talk about population and economic trends in the Portland area. Now, first of all, we start with a recognition that downtown Portland represents only 10% of the employment in the Portland metropolitan area. That's where transit can take you. It can't take you anywhere. If you live here and you work out on 82nd somewhere in Gresham, you think transit's going to get you there as fast as a car? Not a chance. Meanwhile, the various policies that have been intended to try to favor the core of Portland against the rest of the metropolitan area haven't worked at all. During the 2000s, from 2000 to 2009, the suburbs of Portland have added 278,000 people. The city of Portland, only 28,000 people. The city of Portland has done all sorts of things. They have issued hundreds of millions of dollars in bonds to encourage development like this in the South Waterfront District. That nice round building there, that's the John Ross building. Many of the units were recently auctioned there at 70% off minimum bid from the original list price. Another of the buildings had the same problem. Now, the other thing is the issue of domestic migration. Domestic migration is when I move or you move from one part of the nation to another part of the nation. What's going on in Portland? Well, you can see Clark County led the Portland area in domestic migration from 2000 to 2009. Clackamas and Washington didn't do too bad. Multnomah did terribly. And look at some of these more exurban counties like Columbia, Yamhill, and I'm sure I'll mispronounce it, Skamania, is that right? Skamania, okay, I'll never make that mistake again. Okay. If you look at the percentage, however, what you see is in terms of a percentage of the 2,000 population, the suburbs are really doing well, and Multnomah, the core that Portland's policies are intended to favor, is doing very poorly. Look at job creation from 2001 to 2009. Look at how well Clark County has done. Look at downtown Portland. Again, the Metro president was complaining about how downtown Portland is losing market share, is losing workers. Multnomah County, the rest of it did poorly. Clackamas in Washington did a little better. In terms of the percentage of 2001 jobs, again, you see Clark County has done very well. Here is the thing you may not be aware of. We can call it the Clark County growth engine. Virtually all of the employment gains from 2001, which is the earliest good information we have from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, to 2009 is in Clark County. So be aware that for all of your difficulties, you're doing fairly well. So now let's talk about light rail and Clark County and all of that kind of thing. First of all, remember, one of the things we want to do by light rail is to get people out of their car and onto transit so that we reduce traffic congestion. Of course, that doesn't happen, but let's look at what happened here. From 1980 to 2008, the share of people who used transit to get to work in Portland actually declined, and I can't see the number there, but I think it was from around 9% to around 7.5%. Notice a big drop. Now let's go to Seattle. And by the way, Seattle has probably the worst transit planning in the world. It's unbelievable. They built a light rail system up there that is so costly it's unbelievable, but it's only opened the last couple of years, so it really hasn't had much impact. Point is, look at how Seattle did. In the Seattle metropolitan area, over the same period of time with no light rail except for one line that was opened actually after this data was put together by the census, the Seattle area managed to hold on to its share of people using transit to get to work. So in Portland, where we have very strong policies aimed at helping the center, aimed at transit, all of that kind of thing, and Seattle, where the policies are not nearly as strong, Seattle has actually done better. Or if we go to the central county of Multnomah, look how badly it is done compared to the central county of King. Now, these are the kinds of figures you're never going to see. You're never going to see Portland Metro or TriMet people come out and tell you this kind of thing. All you're going to hear is hype about how successful they are. But by any metric, when you look at these kinds of data, you see the same thing. Light rail market share, that is the share of people using light rail to get to work. And this is by work location. Look at Clackamas County. Now, this is before the opening of the town center line, but 0.1%. Multnomah County, which is the best served county by far, 2.3%, and Washington County, almost nothing as well. Here is the amazing thing. Would you believe that probably within the next couple of years, the number of people working at home in the Portland metropolitan area will be more than the number of people that take transit to work? I mean, look at what's been going on. 1980, about 2% of the workers worked at home. That's gone up to the point now where we're at 6%. Look at what's been going on with transit. And by the way, notice, since 2000, despite the higher gasoline price, despite the opening of the interstate line, despite, I believe, the opening of the Portland line, that is the airport line, and so on, we have a situation where transit's share of work trips has gone down. And that's a very important thing because work trips are what define congestion. It's during the period of time that work trips are the biggest that congestion is the worst. If people didn't all go to work at the same time, we wouldn't have traffic congestion. And so we then go and we say, well, now, what about the agency that's actually providing this service of Portland? How are they doing? Well, they've just cut service rather substantially. They've just increased the fares. They have unfunded liabilities that are unbelievable, $850 million at this point, $850 million, and they are not paying their annual share of what they should be paying to fund these liabilities. Last year, they were about $47 million short. You wait until you see the binding arbitration award between TriMet and its drivers. Liable to cost prices, raise costs even more and bring more service cuts. And of course, they're borrowing an awful lot of money. Now, if you look at the metropolitan areas in the United States between 2 and 3 million people and say, well, how bad is the traffic congestion? You see up there Portland right at the top. According to the INRIX a traffic scorecard, which is actually taken from data, GPS data on traffic congestion during peak period. Portland is worse than Baltimore, Denver, and all of these other metropolitan areas.